Okay, so this week we are going to cover this topic that I have called American Expansion Westward. And we are going to be talking about a lot of different topics that we would spend more time with, but just with the way things are, we're going to kind of go through this. And so I'm going to share this information with you, and then we will talk about the assignments at the end. So, again, this week we're going to talk about American Expansion Westward. So the first thing that we have to talk about, and we're jumping ahead a couple of hundred years, is after the formation of the United States. So the United States was originally this area right here. So we have the 13 colonies, and then other lands were added on and other states were formed. Well, in 1803, Thomas Jefferson purchased this huge tract of land called the Louisiana Purchase. And literally, the Louisiana Purchase covered all of this area right here. So this included states like Montana, North and South Dakota, Iowa, Missouri, Kansas is right here, and Louisiana. And he bought this land from France primarily so that they can control right here. This is the Mississippi River. And they didn't have like interstates back then. And the fastest way to ship things or to move items, so like grain, corn, whatever it is that you were making, the fastest way to ship it and move it was by boat. Now, the problem was you can kind of see the Mississippi stops right here. Well, it keeps going and eventually it'd make its way here to New Orleans and go into the Gulf of Mexico. Well, right here are some other rivers that flow in. And so if you have something right here in Ohio, instead of moving it this way all the way to New York, it was faster to get it on the river, go all the way down and around than it was to actually move it by land. And so part of the reason that he wanted to buy the Louisiana Purchase was so they could control the mouth of the Mississippi River and that they could have access to this major highway. I'm going to show you this other map. So this kind of lets you see the green area right here. This is all of what would be the Louisiana Purchase. It's a little bit different than the other map, but it kind of lets you see what states were added. And plus, if you think about it, here is the original United States. After the Louisiana Purchase, the size of the U.S. is going to double. And as you can imagine, I know when I was a little kid and we moved into a new house. And the first thing I did when I got into that new house is I went to explore. I went to run around and see, okay, what do the rooms look like? Where is the bathroom? Check out the backyard. And that's really similar to what the US did. Is they're like, okay, we bought this land. Let's figure out what it is that we just bought. Let's explore it and check it out. And that's exactly what they did. And so they sent several people to look at these new lands and to write and tell the people back in Washington, D.C., what the land was like and what they just purchased. So the first of these people was somebody called Zebulon Pike. Now, if you go to Colorado, there's a famous, there's a Rocky Mountains there, but there's a thing called Pikes Peak, and it's named after him. And so what Zebulon Pike did is he started right here in St. Louis because this was like the western edge. This was the last major city on the west of what was the United States. And so he left from St. Louis. He walked across Missouri. He started to go across Kansas, and then he went up and then back down, and it kind of explored this area. And then the reason it goes down to Mexico is because the Spanish caught them in their lands, and they thought that they were spies. So they took them all the way to Mexico. Eventually, they go all the way back here, and they go up and they go home. Well, in Zebulon Pike's journal, when he describes Kansas, he says that it's nothing but dry and sandy, and that he was pretty sure that nothing could ever grow here. So that was Zebulon Pike's, that was his findings or his description of Kansas, is that it was dry and sandy, and he didn't think you could grow much here. Now another explorer, his name is Stephen Long. And he is going to go on this expedition called the Yellowstone Expedition several years later in 1819. And this is the best map I can find. I apologize, but it's several of his routes. But he's going to start here. He's going to go across. Here's St. Louis. He'll come here. He'll go up the river through Nebraska, go through Colorado, and then he stops here and he kind of splits and he goes into Kansas and explores. He finds the Arkansas River, follows it, goes through what would be Wichita into Oklahoma, and goes some other routes and back up. And he checks out Kansas. And in his report that he is going to send back to Washington, D.C., to the senators, to congressmen and presidents, is he is going to call Kansas the Great American Desert. And he's going to call it the Great American Desert because he believed that nothing could grow here, that there was nothing here. It's just like a desert. People couldn't live there. There weren't like these luscious trees and forests like they had on the East Coast. Instead, it was nothing but just flat grasslands. And he was pretty sure that nobody could grow or even live here. So it's very important to remember that the reports that were coming out about places like Kansas, Nebraska, Oklahoma, and some of these other lands is that this is a great American desert. There's nothing that can survive here. And those reports are going to have a big impact. As we move along into history and as we jump up into the 1830s, we have this order called the Indian Removal Act. And it was pushed by Andrew Jackson, who's a very controversial person in American history because of his treatment of the indigenous people that lived here. And what the Indian Removal Act is going to do is it's going to move all tribes, all indigenous people that live in places like Georgia, New York, Tennessee, Virginia. It's going to move all those indigenous people and force them west of the Mississippi River. And one of the reasons that Andrew Jackson and other members of Congress and the Senate pushed for this was because they were trying to free up land for Western settlers. And so they thought that by moving these people, it would give white settlers more opportunities to grow and farm in places like Tennessee, Kentucky, Indiana, Ohio, Illinois. And so all these people were pushed west of the Mississippi River. And specifically, they were given these lands in places like Nebraska, Kansas, and Oklahoma because they saw this as a great American desert. They saw this land as being very undesirable, places where people would not want to live and places where people would not want to farm. Here's a map that kind of shows you a little bit of where some of the tribes came because it wasn't just Kansas, but it was here in Nebraska and also here in Oklahoma. So you could see some of the routes of some of the major tribes. So like the Cherokees, they came and they were moved here into places in Oklahoma and a little bit of Kansas. Okay, the Shawnee were moved here into there. The Delaware, the Wyandotte also moved back east into Kansas. Places like the Sac and Fox were moved down as well. And so these people, they weren't asked, they were forced to move. And so if we go ahead and look at this map of Kansas, oh shoot, I forgot to change that button. Oh well, that text box. You can kind of see how Kansas was divided up amongst these tribes. And so these people were not indigenous here. These groups were not here. These were not the groups of people that were dealt with the French and Spanish. These people were moved from other places and they were sent here. The exception being like the Kansa and some of these other tribes. Okay. And so these groups were forced, it's really important to remember that they were forced to come here. Okay, so I know that was a lot of information to cover, going from the purchase of the land that is going to become Kansas and the Louisiana Purchase to the exploration to the forcing and removing of indigenous people to here in Kansas and setting up these number of reservations for tribes that are going to be relocated here. Okay, so let's go ahead and let's talk about the assignments for this week. So the first assignment this week that you are going to do is you are going to read this speech by Andrew Jackson that he gave in front of Congress to support the Indian Removal Act. So this is a copy of the second page of the PDF. The first page, it's going to be in Google Classroom, just has a picture of him. But this is the actual speech. And you're going to read this speech. You have to remember that this was written more than 100 years ago, almost 200 years ago. And so the way they spoke is a lot different than the way we speak now. So you got to really read it slowly. There is going to be a Google Doc in Google Classroom that'll be part of this assignment that has 3 questions. And you are going to read this document and answer those 3 questions. Now, just like we did last week, you are going to go ahead and cite / quote the primary source or this speech in helping you to answer that question. In looking at some of the responses that I got for the assignment over the French and Spanish, I'm not sure if I really was clear in how you should have written your responses. And so I'm going to go over that a little bit. So basically, when you use the primary source as evidence, this is very similar to the RAP strategy. So you should have at least a 3-sentence response. In your first sentence, it's just like the RAP strategy. You're going to restate and provide an answer. Your second sentence is where you're going to have your quote from the primary source. Now, this can be just a small part, maybe 3 or 4 words from the primary source. It doesn't have to be the whole sentence, okay? It's fine as long as you have it there, okay? And then the third sentence is where you're going to explain the quote and say, how does this evidence support your argument? So let me give you an example. So here's an example from last week's assignment. This was the question over the French, and it said, what was the goal of Bourgmont's mission? What did he think was the best way to accomplish this mission? So the first sentence, that's where I restate and provide my answer. And I put the goal of Bourgmont's mission was to establish peace with the indigenous people. Okay, restate my answer. Second sentence is where I have my quote. I said, Bourgmont told the indigenous people that he had come to not only trade, but to make peace with them. So I quoted the primary source and I put into context, there's my evidence because that's what he said. And then third, I said, this showed that Bourgmont believed it was important to have both peace and trade with indigenous people. So I got to say how that evidence supports my argument. So some people didn't necessarily do this the correct way, and that's fine. As long as you made an attempt to do it, I gave you the full points. Our second assignment will be very similar to what we've done the last couple weeks, is we are going to make another entry in our pandemic journal. Now, some of you, I'm not sure if you understood this, but you should have a separate document where you are recording all of your journal entries. And then after you put a journal entry there, you should be copying and pasting that into the Google Doc that's provided in Google Classroom for you to submit that, okay? And then the very last week is when we'll submit that big long document you should have with all of your entries. Now there's a couple just basic things I want to say. First of all is that I'm sending a lot of emails and making a lot of phone calls to people who are not doing the assignments. And you should remember that assignments are due the day before our scheduled class is to meet. So first period meets on Monday, second period meets on Tuesday, seventh period meets on Wednesday, and then eighth period meets on Thursday. So if you are in eighth period and you're scheduled to kind of meet on Thursday, then that means your assignments are due on Wednesday, okay? Second thing is, if you haven't been doing work, I've been sending out emails, and for some of you, I've actually have called home to find out what is going on, okay? If you have questions, you can email me and whatnot, but please just don't do the assignment. And then lastly is the quality of work I'm getting. There are some people that are not putting forth a lot of effort into their assignments. They're just kind of throwing stuff. And I'm emailing people and asking them to redo the assignment. These assignments are still graded. They're not pass-fail. You do get a grade for it. And so if you want to improve your grade, this is a way for you to improve your grade by doing well on these assignments. They're not difficult. Last, I hope all of you are doing okay. I hope things are going well for your family. I know with our family it's been a little chaotic just with all of us working at home and trying to keep Grayson in line and doing stuff with him. I hope this isn't the new normal. I do miss you guys. It was great to see some of you this week in the Superhero Smackdown with Miss Zelvy. I love you guys. If you do have questions, you are struggling with this, please let me know. You can send me a phone call, email, whatever you need to do to help you. Okay. Love you guys. Please be safe, and I can't wait to see you all again.